This was the opposite of a fraud check. If you still hate Van after this performance, what are you doing? This was a flyweight title fight between Joshua Van and Tatsuro Taira. Van was coming in as the champion after beating Pantoja due to injury, and a lot of people weren't happy with Van because of how he celebrated the injury of Pantoja, so he was coming into this fight with something to prove with the chip on his shoulder. Right off the bat, you can see Taira establish the range. He's the taller, longer fighter, so he wants to keep Van on the outside, and he was doing a good job of landing those low kicks on Van because Van is a boxing heavy style. He's heavy on that lead leg, so Taira kicking that leg out was a good strategy. Taira's going to look to establish the range again. He's going to feint again, then throw a long jab, and you see Van thinks about countering, but because the range is off, he doesn't throw it. After that, Taira is going to land another low kick after setting it up with a slapping left hook. Then Taira is going to shoot a takedown. Van tries to get his hips back, but they bump up against the cage. Now Taira has his hands locked, and you see Van right here. He's going to try to use his right leg to kind of make Taira's grip kind of slip off from underneath his butt, but Taira does a great job of adjusting. He's going to move that leg out of the way, and then he's going to trip that same leg and get Van down. Taira is immediately going to move to mount, and this is where Taira's bread and butter is right here. Van is going to start bugging his hips, and he's able to get that left knee out. So now he has one butterfly hook on that left side. He's going to use that butterfly hook, you're going to see, to elevate the hips of Taira and try to clear that leg. He almost gets butterfly hooks on both sides, but he keeps that left leg high, and that forces Taira to go into side control. And this is important because now Van can use the cage to help him get up, to help him get that leverage, to get back to his feet, and that's exactly what he does. But Taira's so smart, he immediately attacks a choke to get Van to have to address that before he can fully stand up, and he's back on the ground. Van is going to clear that choke first, and that's going to force Taira to adjust, which gives Van the opportunity to fully stand up. And now they're back in Van's world, and now Van is ramping up the pressure. Right there, he lands a jab. Taira's going to try to bait Van into throwing a jab, but he gets the range wrong, and he gets caught. Great timing by Van right here. Right as Taira hops in a range, Van immediately pops that jab and lands clean, and you see he's looking for that slip inside to right-hand counter that he's so good at. Now the momentum for Van is building, so Taira is going to try to go back to that low kick, but Van is able to avoid it this time. For me, it's always a bad sign when I see a guy's head getting snapped back with these jabs. Taira just didn't have much head movement, and his hands weren't very active. Here they're going to be on the same timing, and they're going to snap each other's head back with the jab, and this is experience in fighting. Taira knows that they're on the same timing, so instead of punching with Van at the same time, instead he's going to shoot a takedown as Van is overextended with that jab. He's going to take him down and get him to the ground. And Taira is immediately going to do what Khabib used to do to people and just cinch up those two legs to make it hard for the guy on the bottom to build back a base. But one problem was Taira's head positioning. Van's head was still above Taira's, so Van is able to get his legs free, and now Taira doesn't have as much leverage to keep Van on the ground. Like right here, even though Taira has 2-on-1 on Van's left wrist, there's nothing really holding Van's weight down, because once he frees that wrist, he's able to use the cage, use his arm to post, and get back to his feet. But this is great head positioning from Taira. He's keeping the top of his head right on the cheek of Van, so Van has to address that before he can think about escaping the clinch, and he does right there. Now Van is using his head positioning to kind of break the posture of Taira, but Taira is just going to follow the momentum of where Van was already going. He's going to force him to plant on that left leg and then take it out from under him and take him down again. Taira's going to get into mount, but great scrambling by Van to just make things wild, make it difficult for Taira to finish the round on top, and Van is going to finish the round on his feet. Round 2 starts, and Van continues to do the right thing of pressuring Taira, making him walk backwards, because when you're shorter, you need to be the one bringing the fight to them. I don't want to frame this fight as striker versus grappler because Taira's got hands too. Right there, he pops Van's head back with the jab. Then he's going to shoot a takedown, but this time Van is heavy on the hips, heavy with that sprawl, and he's able to stay on his feet. Up against the fence, Van is going to use that left arm to turn Taira to get off the fence, and Taira is going to opt to just throw a knee and then release the clinch. And this is why I love Van. Right here is going to show off that crispy boxing by slipping inside that right hand and landing a right uppercut to left hook. Then he's going to slip again inside that jab and land that patented right overhand. Slipping inside, then he's going to follow it up with the left hand and then land a right overhand as Taira tries to throw that knee. And again, Taira gets his head popped back with this jab right here, and it's just not a good sign when a guy's getting hit clean like this. Like right here, Taira is just standing in front of him with his head forward, hands completely down, not in stance, and Van just takes full advantage of it by landing that right hand, and Taira's not in any position to defend himself. Van just keeps beating Taira to the punch because his punches are short and straight and Taira's winging his shots. So Taira's taking some damage, so he's going to go back to the game plan of shooting the takedown. He's going to do a nice trip right here on Van, and now he has him down. Taira is going to stay heavy on Van for most of this time that they're on the ground, but Van is the one actually putting damage on Taira, attacking the body with these elbows, with these punches, while Taira kind of just lays on him and rests. Eventually, Van is going to use this left underhook and slide out the side of half guard, and Taira is going to attack that front headlock again, but Van is going to stay calm. He's going to be able to continue to build back up, and Taira is going to run up against the fence, but Van stays composed, and eventually Taira just lets him off the hook. Final 30 seconds, Van lands another jab, and he's going to time a beautiful right hand right as Taira throws that low kick, and now Taira's in trouble. And the round's going to end with Van just raining shots down from the top. Round 3 starts, and Van is looking to pick up right where he left off, continuing to land these jabs, and you can see Taira is now panic shooting, and Van is just not giving him a single inch. Taira's head just does not move off the center line at all. Right here, just a beautiful right hand with no telegraph from Van. And now Van has made it a close-range fight. Taira is backed up against the fence, and you see Van start letting his hands go right here. Just beautiful boxing combinations. After taking more damage, Taira again looks for a sloppy shot, which is easily defended by Van. Beautiful distance management by Van right here. Taira is looking to time that knee off of the jab of Van, but Van just perfectly out of the way of that knee. Doesn't commit heavy on that jab, just pops it and gets out of range. Another clean right hand from Van, and now some body work. And now the levels and striking are revealing themselves with Van just popping Taira's head back continuously. For Taira, I think he needed to land more of these leg kicks early on, because when you get Van walking forward and you're walking back and he has you up against the fence and you let him just go like this, he is incredibly difficult to stop. And the great thing about Van is he doesn't rush in either. Right here, he's still cognizant enough to get out of the way of that right hand. He's pressuring, but he's pressuring from a safe distance. And here, Van continues to jab his way in. You see Taira's face is all messed up right now. And here, Van lands a beautiful right uppercut. And I cannot stress this enough, Taira was having such a hard time seeing these jabs. Right there, he gets dropped with one, and he needed to be moving his head more. He needed to get that distance back at a range that he was comfortable with, but letting Van just pop his head back and not seeing it was such a bad sign. And it's not just about getting hit with the jab, because you can get hit with jabs, but it's the way that he wasn't even reacting at all until the jab snapped his head back. That was where it was really bad. And now Van is just hunting for the kill with Taira, and this might have been a tactical error by Van. After all the success he was having on the feet, he takes Taira down. After that takedown, Van is going to try to submit Taira, and you can tell he really had that chip on his shoulder because he was trying to prove a point. But Taira wasn't going to let that happen, so Van just gives up on the choke and just lets him back on the feet. And respect to Taira, because even after taking all this damage, he still wasn't out of the fight. Right here, he lands a nice counter left hook followed by a jab. But then he drops his hands and immediately gets hit clean with another right hand. Right here, Taira's going to shoot kind of a half-ass takedown, abandon it, and get hit with a right hand because of it. And this was an interesting sequence right here. Taira's going to fake the shot, Van defends, and he's going to see that Taira continues to kind of duck down low. So Van is going to throw this right uppercut, which catches Taira as he's ducking down. But this is how you know Taira's a real fighter. He's getting beat up, so he just says, F it, I'm just going to start throwing crazy, and whatever happens, happens. Now that Taira has Van focused on the hands, Taira is going to shoot a takedown right here. After clinching along the fence for a little bit, Taira is going to be able to take Van down, which was amazing after all the damage that he took in this round. But Van doesn't stay down there for long. He uses the underhook to get back to the feet, and that's where the round ends. More proof that Taira should have been spamming these leg kicks. Right there, he lands a hard one on Van. Off that leg kick, Taira lands a nice right uppercut to left hook, and now Taira feels like he's back in the fight. Taira's using the same strategy of getting Van to think about the hand so he can shoot the takedown, and he's able to get to the hips of Van once again. Taira's going to be able to trip Van once again, but this time Van is able to get those butterfly hooks from the start. But Taira is so good, he's eventually able to clear those butterfly hooks, and he's going to cinch up the legs of Van once again. Van is going to start bucking again to try to get those butterfly hooks back in, and now they're just fighting for position. Van looks like he's able to get that butterfly hook temporarily, but Taira just stays relentless and doesn't let him get it. The fact that Taira took all that damage in the second and third round, and to come back and work his way back into this fight, it was amazing to watch. But Van is very effective at getting back to his feet, so right as Taira gives him just a little bit of space, Van immediately takes advantage of it. So Taira's going to try to cinch up a triangle choke or try to lock it up. He's going to try to maybe switch it to an omoplata, but Van is able to get out. Van's going to invite Taira up. Taira obliges and immediately starts throwing like a dog. Great boxing by Van here, but Taira is just way too relaxed and his hands are way too low when they're in punching range. He needs to have his hands up and ready for strikes. I definitely think Taira could have benefited from more kicks like right here just to keep Van's hands preoccupied and have a long-range weapon against Van. Like right here, Taira is going to throw some cases and throw a front kick down the middle, and that just stops the forward pressure of Van momentarily. Another shot from Taira right here, but he does it from a little too far out, so Van is able to sprawl effectively, land that knee, and now they're clinching against the fence. After that, Taira is going to look for that trip one more time against Van, but this time Van is able to get his leg out and defend. 10 seconds left in the round, they break, and Van just opens up with a couple more strikes, and this is where the round ends. In this round, Joshua Van said that his coaches told him to start going to the body, and that's when the finish would happen, and you're going to see how he does that. Right here, Taira misses the kick and goes into southpaw and shows a long guard just because Van has been jabbing his face off all night. But you kind of need to know what you're doing when you're in southpaw. So even though he's showing long guard, he's not very active with his defense, and Van is able to just pop him with his right hand right down the middle. Van was just showing beautiful pressure and distance management. He's staying just on the outside of Taira's strikes right there. He makes Taira miss barely with that jab. He's going to make Taira miss with this kick right here. He's just pressuring but not getting caught with anything dumb, and then he lands a right hand of his own. Taira is going to look to clinch right here, but Van is not going to let that happen. Once again, Taira is going to throw hard with the hands to set up the takedown. He's going to shoot, but Van is able to sprawl, and they're going to get back up against the fence again, but Van is just not going to let Taira do this to him this round. It's the last round. He shucks him off, and now they're back in the center. Right after that, Taira again tries to shoot a takedown, but Van is easily able to defend this one. After that, both men are going to start exchanging in the pocket, and Van is going to show some beautiful body work as Taira tries to clinch. He's going to slip that punch, change the angle, and land a nice left hook, and then he's going to be able to defend the takedown. Van is going to shut Taira off, and now he just goes to work. Jab, 2 to the body, 3 to the head, continuing to jab. Taira is exhausted at this point with all these takedown attempts, and Van just gives him no chance to rest, lands clean with that right hand, continues to land until the ref pulls him off.